The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the crystalline halls. Ambassador Marcus Thompson walked through, his black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast against the shimmering walls that seemed to be made of living light. Behind him followed Captain Rebecca Hayes, her marine dress blues pristine and her posture military straight. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of 10 football fields, with seats arranged in concentric circles rising up like an ancient amphitheater. But instead of stone, everything was made from materials that seemed to defy physics: floating platforms, chairs that mold themselves to their occupants, and holographic displays that hung in mid-air like captured starlight. Marcus had been to this chamber many times before, but today felt different. Today, the air itself seemed to crackle with anticipation and barely contained hostility. The assembled delegates from across the galaxy were not here for routine trade negotiations or territorial disputes. They were here to discuss humanity. The Valachian delegation occupied the largest section of seats, their insect-like bodies gleaming under the chamber's strange light. Each Valachian stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws and compound eyes that could track multiple targets simultaneously. They had conquered 17 star systems in the past decade alone, and their military reputation preceded them like a shadow. Commander Thale, the Valachian fleet leader, rose from his seat with a sound like breaking glass. His translator box, a small device that floated near his head, converted his chittering speech into cold, mechanical words. Human Ambassador Thompson. How gracious of you to join us today. We were just discussing your species' rather unique approach to warfare. A wave of laughter rippled through the chamber, but it was not the warm laughter of friends sharing a joke. This was the laughter of predators who had found particularly amusing prey. The sound came from dozens of different species, some through vocal cords, others through clicking mandibles, and still others through vibrations that the chamber's translation system rendered as mocking chuckles. Marcus took his place at the central podium, his hand steady as he activated the holographic display. Images began to appear in the air around him: documents, military protocols, and training manuals that detailed human military doctrine. Thank you, Commander Thale. I understand you have questions about our military procedures. The ethereal Cortani delegates began to pulse with colors that their translators interpreted as amusement. General Voss, their war leader, was more energy than matter, his form constantly shifting like contained lightning. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Questions? Oh no, Ambassador. We have no questions. We have observations. Another delegate stood up, this one from the hegemony of Krell. The Krells looked almost human, except for their gray skin and the fact that they had no concept of mercy. Captain Dex of their battle fleet pointed one long finger at the floating images. These documents of yours, they are fascinating. You actually have rules about treating prisoners kindly? More laughter filled the chamber as the images showed human protocols for prisoner treatment, requirements for medical care, proper food, and protection from harm. To the assembled aliens, it looked like a manual for coddling enemies. And look at this, Commander Thale added, his claws clicking as he gestured at another document. Rules about avoiding civilian targets. You actually go out of your way to protect enemy non-combatants during warfare. Captain Rebecca Hayes watched from her seat in the gallery, her face a mask of professional calm. She had volunteered to come to this session, knowing what would happen. She had served in 3 different wars, had seen what humans could do when the gloves came off, and she knew something that these laughing aliens did not. The Valachian commander continued his presentation, pulling up more human military documents. Proportional response protocols. Rules of engagement that require identifying targets before firing. Restrictions on orbital bombardment of population centers. Each item he listed brought fresh waves of amusement from the assembled delegates. An ancient delegate from the Syndicate of Worlds, a species that had been conquering others since before humans discovered fire, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. In our experience, species that fight with such restrictions do not fight for very long. The chamber erupted in agreement. Species after species stood to share their own observations about human weakness. They spoke of how human colonies seemed barely defended, how human ships appeared to carry fewer weapons than their size would allow, and how human diplomatic messages always seemed to emphasize peaceful resolution over military action. General Voss's energy form pulsed brighter as he addressed the chamber. When we expand into human space, and we will expand, these charitable impulses will serve them poorly. A species that worries more about enemy casualties than victory has already chosen defeat. Marcus listened to it all with the patience of a career diplomat. He had expected this reaction. The galaxy's major powers had been watching humanity for decades now, studying their conflicts, analyzing their tactics, and reaching all the wrong conclusions. Commander Thale activated a new holographic display, this one showing star charts with human colonies marked in blue and various alien territories marked in different colors. The outer territories are rich with resources that more practical species could put to better use. When we begin our expansion, we will start with the human colonies. They will serve as an excellent example to other species about the cost of naive idealism. The chamber filled with approving sounds from dozens of different species. The Valakians clicked their mandibles in anticipation. The Cortani pulsed with eager energy. The Krell began discussing which human worlds would fall first. But Captain Hayes noticed something the others had missed. Near the back of the chamber, in seats reserved for the oldest and most experienced species, several delegates had remained silent throughout the entire presentation. The Eldari, who had been spacefaring for millennia, watched the proceedings with what might have been concern. The Watchers, mysterious beings who rarely spoke at council sessions, had gone completely still. As the laughter and planning continued around him, Marcus Thompson made one final entry into his diplomatic log. The message was simple and would be transmitted to Earth within the hour: diplomatic resolution impossible. Recommend activation of Protocol 7. In the gallery, Captain Hayes smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. Protocol 7. The aliens laughing below had no idea what they had just triggered, but they would learn soon enough. They would learn the difference between choosing restraint and being incapable of violence. The die had been cast. The attack began at dawn on New Plymouth, when most of the colonists were still drinking their morning coffee and checking the weather reports for the day's farming work. The first sign of trouble was when all the communication satellites went silent at exactly 0600 hours, followed by a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Admiral Keth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devastator, watching the peaceful human colony grow larger on his main screen. The planet looked exactly like what his intelligence reports had promised, a simple farming world with wide fields of grain, small settlements scattered across the landscape, and absolutely no visible military defenses. Perfect, Keth said, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. Begin recording for galactic broadcast. Let the Council see what happens to species that think kindness is a military strategy. Around him, his bridge crew worked with efficient brutality. The Valakian attack fleet consisted of 50 warships, enough firepower to glass an entire planet if necessary. But that would not send the right message. This needed to be slow, methodical, and humiliating for the humans. Down on New Plymouth, Colony Administrator James Parker was having his third cup of coffee when the emergency alarms began screaming. He had been expecting this day for 3 years, ever since the intelligence reports started coming in about Valakian expansion plans. What the aliens did not know was that James Parker had not always been a farmer. All hands, this is not a drill, James announced over the colony's communication system, his voice calm and steady. Protocol 7 is now active. Repeat, Protocol 7 is active. All civilians to designated shelters. All veterans to assigned positions. We are now at unrestricted warfare status. Across the colony, something remarkable happened. The peaceful farmers working in their fields did not run around in panic or huddle in fear. Instead, they moved with military precision toward hidden bunkers and concealed weapon positions. Because every single colonist on New Plymouth was a military veteran, carefully selected and placed on this world for exactly this moment. The first Valakian plasma barrage struck the outer fields at 0615 hours. The aliens expected to see crops burning and panicked humans running for cover. Instead, massive gun turrets erupted from underground bunkers, their railguns sending streams of hypervelocity projectiles toward the attacking fighters. What is happening? Admiral Keth demanded as his tactical display showed 12 of his fighters disappearing in the first 30 seconds of combat. Intelligence reports indicated no military installations on this world. His weapons officer, a younger Valakian named Vex, was frantically adjusting targeting sensors. Admiral, I am detecting weapon signatures across the entire planet. Missile batteries, rail gun installations, particle beam arrays, the entire colony appears to be a fortress. On the planet's surface, what had appeared to be simple farm buildings began revealing their true nature. Barn doors slid open to expose heavy artillery pieces. Grain silos split apart to launch surface-to-orbit missiles. Even the farmhouses had hidden weapon ports that emerged from walls and rooftops. Colonel Tom Bradley, the colony's true military commander, coordinated the defense from a bunker that had been disguised as a water treatment plant. His command center was filled with tactical displays and communication equipment that would have impressed a Navy admiral. Air defense grid is fully operational. All missile batteries are hot and tracking targets. Ground forces are in position. The Valachian ground assault began an hour after the initial bombardment failed. Troop transports descended toward what their commanders thought would be defenseless farming communities. Instead, they found themselves flying into carefully prepared kill zones where every tree, every building, and every piece of farm equipment had been positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. Sergeant Lisa Martinez had been growing tomatoes for 3 years, but before that, she had spent 15 years as a Marine sniper. Her farmhouse had an excellent view of the main landing zone, and she had been preparing for this day since the moment she planted her first crop. Her rifle had been hidden in a secret compartment behind the kitchen pantry. First transport is in range, she reported to her spotter, a former artillery officer named David Chen who had been raising chickens in the barn next door. Wind is calm, range is 800 meters. The transport never had a chance. Lisa's shot took out the pilot, sending the craft spinning into the ground where it exploded in a ball of flame. Around the colony, similar scenes played out as farmers revealed themselves to be soldiers and gardens became battlefields. Admiral Keth watched his invasion turn into a disaster from his command ship. Half his fighters were gone, 3 transport ships had been destroyed, and his ground forces were pinned down by enemy fire coming from every direction. This was supposed to be an easy victory against a peaceful colony world. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the planet," reported his communication officer. "Put it on screen," Keth ordered. The image that appeared showed Colony Administrator James Parker, except now he was wearing the uniform of a human Marine colonel. Behind him, other colonists could be seen manning weapons and tactical stations, all of them in military gear. "Admiral Keth," Parker said calmly, "I am Colonel James Parker, commanding officer of New Plymouth Defense Force. You have attacked a human colony world and killed civilian personnel. This constitutes an act of war under galactic law. You have exactly 60 seconds to begin withdrawal before we activate our orbital defense platforms." "Orbital platforms?" Keth sputtered. Intelligence showed no orbital installations around this world. Parker smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "That is because you were looking for installations. You should have been looking for asteroids." Around New Plymouth, what had appeared to be natural space rocks suddenly came alive with weapon signatures. The humans had been moving defense platforms into the system for months, disguising them as mining operations and asteroid surveys. Now those asteroids opened like metal flowers, revealing massive rail guns and missile batteries. "Admiral," his tactical officer called out, "I am reading 47 separate platform signatures. They have us completely surrounded." Parker's voice came through the speakers again. "Admiral, this is your final warning. Withdraw your forces immediately, or we will demonstrate why humans developed rules of engagement." But Admiral Keth had come too far to retreat now. The entire galaxy was watching this broadcast. To withdraw would mean admitting defeat at the hands of farmers. "All ships, prepare for full assault. Destroy everything on that planet." Parker nodded as if he had expected this response. "Very well. All platforms, you are weapons free. Show them why we have rules." The asteroids opened fire. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within 6 hours of the Battle of New Plymouth. The massive chamber buzzed with nervous energy as delegates from across the galaxy tried to process what they had witnessed. The Valachian attack fleet had been completely destroyed, with only a handful of survivors managing to escape in damaged ships. Captain Rebecca Hayes walked through the chamber doors wearing her full Marine dress uniform, every medal and ribbon perfectly placed. Her boots clicked against the crystal floor with military precision as she made her way to the central podium. The conversations around her died down as delegates noticed her approach, replaced by whispers and uncertain glances. The surviving Valachian commander, Admiral Keth, sat in a medical hover chair with his left arm in a regeneration sleeve. His compound eyes tracked Hayes as she passed, filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. Next to him, the other Valachian delegates looked like they had seen ghosts. General Voss of the Cortani floated in his energy form above his designated area, pulsing with colors that indicated agitation. "Captain Hayes," his voice echoed through the chamber, "we have reviewed the battle footage from New Plymouth. Your colony was clearly a military installation disguised as a civilian settlement. This violates numerous galactic treaties." Hayes stopped at the podium and looked up at the thousands of delegates surrounding her. She did not activate the amplification systems or the holographic displays. Her voice carried naturally through the vast space, trained by years of giving orders on battlefields. General Voss, every building on New Plymouth was exactly what it appeared to be. Farms, houses, schools, hospitals. The colonists grew real crops, raised real families, and lived real lives. The fact that they were also veterans does not change what they were doing there. Commander Thale, one of the few Valachian officers to survive the battle, clicked his mandibles angrily. They had hidden weapons everywhere. Military bunkers disguised as civilian structures. Rail guns in barns. Yes, Hayes replied simply. They did. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Captain Dex of the Krell battle fleet leaned forward in his seat. Then you admit to violating the concordat of civilized warfare? Disguising military assets as civilian targets. Hayes turned to face him directly. Captain Dex, I want you to think very carefully about what you just said. You are accusing us of hiding weapons to defend ourselves. But what you should be asking is why we felt the need to hide them in the first place. She began walking in a slow circle around the podium, her gaze moving from delegate to delegate. For the past year, you have been planning to attack human colonies. You have spoken openly about it in these very chambers. You have discussed which worlds to hit first, how to divide up our territory, and how to make examples of our people. The ancient delegate from the Syndicate of Worlds shifted uncomfortably in his stone seat. That is the natural order of expansion. Stronger species take from weaker ones. It has been this way for millennia. And that, Hayes said, stopping her pacing, brings us to the real issue. You have fundamentally misunderstood something about humanity. Our military protocols, our rules of engagement, our restrictions on warfare, you think these make us weak. She activated a small holographic projector from her uniform belt. Images began appearing in the air around her, but these were different from the documents shown in previous sessions. These showed human history, medieval battlefields, ancient sieges, and wars that had consumed entire continents. Let me tell you about human warfare before we had rules, Hayes continued. We once had a war that lasted 100 years. We had another war where we killed 60 million of our own species in 6 years. We developed weapons that could destroy entire cities in minutes, and we used them. The images showed the aftermath of ancient battles, cities reduced to rubble, and landscapes scarred by weapons of incredible destructiveness. The chamber had gone completely silent. Commander Thale's translator box crackled as he spoke. These are just historical records. Ancient conflicts from before you reached space. Hayes smiled, and several delegates noticed that her expression was not reassuring. Commander, these conflicts ended less than 200 years ago. Most human families still tell stories about them. We remember what we are capable of when we stop following rules. She gestured to the holographic images around her. Every protocol you mocked, every restriction you laughed at, exists because we learned what happens when we do not have them. Our rules of engagement are not limitations placed upon us by others, they are limitations we place upon ourselves. General Voss's energy form flickered with uncertainty. You are attempting to frighten us with threats of violence. This is precisely the kind of primitive thinking we expected from your species. No, Hayes replied calmly. I am not threatening you. I am warning you. There is a difference. She deactivated the holographic display and placed her hands behind her back in a parade rest position. Admiral Keth made a choice when he attacked New Plymouth. He chose to target civilian settlements. He chose to ignore surrender offers. He chose to continue his attack even when faced with overwhelming defensive fire. Those choices have consequences. The Eldari delegate, ancient beyond measure, spoke for the first time in decades. His voice was like wind through crystal caves. What consequences, human? Hayes turned to face the oldest species in the galaxy. New Plymouth was defended under our rules of engagement. The colonists followed established protocols for defensive warfare. They offered terms for surrender. They provided warning before using lethal force. Admiral Keth rejected all of these options. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the chamber. But Admiral Keth's attack was broadcast across the galaxy as a demonstration of human weakness. Every species in this chamber saw footage of Valachian forces deliberately targeting civilian areas. This means that humanity is no longer bound by peacetime military protocols. What does that mean? Captain Dex asked, though his voice suggested he was beginning to understand. Hayes looked directly at him. It means that the human fleet currently approaching Valachian space is not operating under rules of engagement. They are operating under Protocol 7. As if summoned by her words, proximity alarms began sounding throughout the chamber. Through the great transparent walls that surrounded the council hall, they could see ships dropping out of hyperspace, angular, predatory vessels that moved with deadly purpose. The human fleet had arrived, and they were not coming to negotiate. Admiral Keth tried to stand from his medical chair, his voice filled with panic. How many ships? Hayes checked her communication device. Admiral William Cross is commanding Task Force 7. Approximately 200 vessels, including 12 heavy assault carriers and 36 battlecruisers. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates began frantically accessing their own communication systems, trying to reach their home fleets. But Hayes continued speaking, her voice cutting through the noise. The difference between strength and restraint, honored delegates, is choice. We chose restraint. You chose war. Now you will learn why we made that choice. Retry K. Admiral William Cross stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the Valachian homeworld grow larger on the main display. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, blue oceans, green continents, and the glittering lights of major cities visible even from space. It would not look peaceful for much longer. Sir, the Valachian Grand Fleet is moving to intercept, reported Commander Lisa Martinez from her position at the tactical station. I count 297 vessels. They are forming a defensive line between us and their homeworld. Cross nodded without taking his eyes off the screen. He had been expecting this. The Valachians were brave fighters, and they would not surrender their home without a battle. What they did not understand was that this was not going to be a battle, it was going to be an execution. Signal the fleet, Cross ordered. All ships are weapons-free. No quarter will be given. No surrender will be accepted. Execute Protocol 7. Around the bridge, his officers began implementing orders that had not been used in over 50 years. Protocol 7 was humanity's doctrine for total warfare, the complete removal of all restrictions on military action. It was a protocol that most serving officers had never seen activated, because the galaxy had never given humanity a reason to use it. Lieutenant Commander Tom Bradley, the ship's weapons officer, looked up from his console. Sir, all weapon systems are showing green. Missile pods are armed and ready. The new systems are fully operational. Cross smiled grimly. The new systems. 4 decades, human ships had carried what appeared to be cargo containers and sensor arrays. The galaxy's intelligence services had catalogued these additions as defensive equipment or civilian supplies. They had been wrong. Launch all pods, Cross commanded. What the Valachians had mistaken for supply containers suddenly opened like metal flowers, revealing their true nature. Each human ship disgorged hundreds of autonomous hunter-killer drones, small craft no bigger than fighters but packed with military-grade AI and enough firepower to cripple a cruiser. Within minutes, the space around the human fleet was filled with thousands of these deadly machines. Admiral Vex of the Valachian Home Defense Fleet watched from his flagship as the human formation approached. He commanded the largest military force his species had ever assembled, and he was confident in his ability to defend his homeworld. The humans had shown their capabilities at New Plymouth, but that had been a planetary defense. This was ship-to-ship combat, where Valachian superiority had never been questioned. All ships, prepare to engage, Vex ordered. Target their command ships first. Once we destroy their leadership, the rest will surrender. The first mistake Admiral Vex made was assuming the humans would fight like a traditional fleet. The second mistake was assuming they were still following the same rules they had used in previous conflicts. He realized both errors when the human drones reached his forward screen. The Valachian fighters moved to intercept what they expected to be a standard drone attack. Instead, they found themselves facing machines that fought within human precision and complete disregard for their own survival. Each drone was programmed with detailed tactical information about Valachian ship designs, weapon systems, and defensive capabilities. They knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Admiral, we are losing fighters at an incredible rate, reported his tactical officer. These drones are not following standard attack patterns. They are targeting specific system nodes. Before Vex could respond, the main human battle line opened fire. What emerged from their weapons was unlike anything the Valachians had ever encountered. Instead of traditional energy beams or missile salvos, the human ships fired streams of projectiles that seemed to bend space around them, moving at velocities that should have been impossible. The UES Retribution led the charge, its new gravitational railgun sending projectiles through Valachian shields as if they did not exist. Each shot was calculated by military AI systems that had been analyzing Valachian technology for decades, finding weaknesses that the aliens did not even know they had. Commander Martinez watched her targeting display with professional satisfaction. Direct hit on their flagship's engine section. Their main drive is offline. Cross nodded. Continue firing. Target their communication arrays next. I want them unable to coordinate their defense. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than 20 minutes. The Valachian Grand Fleet, which had conquered 17 star systems and terrorized dozens of species, was systematically destroyed by human weapons that violated numerous galactic treaties and several laws of physics. Admiral Vex, his ship crippled and his fleet burning around him, activated his emergency communication system. Human vessels, this is Admiral Vex of the Valachian Home Defense Fleet. We request terms for surrender. We yield the battle to you. Cross received the transmission on his command chair, listening to the desperate plea of his enemy. For a moment, his bridge crew expected him to respond with the standard acceptance of surrender that human forces had always offered in previous conflicts. Instead, Cross activated his own communication system and broadcast his response on all frequencies, ensuring that every ship in the system, and every intelligence service monitoring the battle, could hear his words. Admiral Vex, this is Admiral William Cross of the Human Defense Force. You attacked our civilians. You broadcast the murder of non-combatants as entertainment for the galaxy. There are no terms. There is no surrender. There is only justice. The human fleet resumed firing. In the following hours, as the Valachian homeworld watched their entire space-based military force disappear from their senses, Admiral Cross began the orbital bombardment of military targets on the planet's surface. But these were not the careful, precision strikes that human forces had used in previous conflicts. These were the systematic elimination of every military installation, every weapons factory, and every spaceport on the planet. The humans had removed their gloves, and the galaxy was witnessing the difference between restraint and inability. Species across the galaxy watched the live feeds with growing horror, finally understanding that they had not been negotiating with prey, they had been face to face with apex predators who had chosen mercy. The Valachian civilization, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, ceased to exist as a military power in less than 6 hours. Their homeworld survived, but only because Cross decided that a broken species would serve as a better warning than a dead one. As the last Valachian military installation fell silent, Cross made one final broadcast to the galaxy. Let this serve as a lesson to any species considering aggression against human colonies. We tried to show you restraint. We tried to show you mercy. You mistook both for weakness. This mistake will not be repeated. 3 months after the destruction of the Valachian Grand Fleet, the Galactic Council chamber looked very different. Where once the Valachian delegation had occupied the largest section of seats, now there was only empty space marked with a small memorial plaque. The few surviving Valachians sat in a much smaller area, their once proud posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of a broken people. Captain Rebecca Hayes walked through the chamber doors wearing the same marine dress uniform she had worn during her warning 3 months ago. But this time, the conversations did not die down when she entered. Instead, delegates from across the galaxy stood in respectful silence as she passed. The laughter and mockery of the previous sessions had been replaced by something much more valuable, understanding. Ambassador Marcus Thompson followed behind her, carrying a leather briefcase that contained the most important treaty in galactic history. The document inside would reshape the balance of power among the stars, but not in the way anyone had expected 6 months ago. The Courtani General Voss floated above his delegation in his energy form, but the bright colors that had once indicated confidence and aggression had faded to muted tones that suggested careful thought and genuine concern. Captain Hayes, his voice echoed through the chamber, we have reviewed the complete battle records from the Valachian system. The efficiency of your military response was remarkable. Hayes took her position at the central podium, but this time she did not need to project her voice or demand attention. Every being in the vast chamber was listening intently to her words. General Voss, the efficiency you observed was the result of removing artificial limitations from our military doctrine. When we stopped following peacetime protocols, our forces were able to operate at their designed capacity. The ancient Eldari delegate leaned forward in his crystalline seat, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the chamber's light like scattered diamonds. Captain, we have been spacefaring for over 10,000 years. In all that time, we have never witnessed the complete destruction of a major fleet in less than 20 minutes. How is this possible? Hayes activated her holographic display, showing technical readouts that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. The weapon systems you observed had been integrated into our ships for decades. What you saw as cargo containers were actually missile pods. What appeared to be sensor arrays were targeting computers. What looked like defensive shields were energy projection systems. Commander Thale, one of only 12 Valakian officers to survive the battle, spoke from his section with a voice that carried the weight of absolute defeat. You have been preparing for total warfare while pretending to be peaceful farmers and diplomats. No, Hayes replied firmly. We have been preparing for the possibility that our peaceful approach would fail. There is a significant difference. She gestured to the holographic displays around her, which now showed human colony worlds, trade routes, and diplomatic missions throughout the galaxy. For 50 years, humanity has been expanding into galactic civilization using trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and mutual defense treaties. We built schools on alien worlds, established hospitals for refugee populations, and created research partnerships with dozens of species. The display shifted to show the extensive network of human civilian operations across the galaxy, medical facilities, educational institutions, and research centers that had quietly become part of the fabric of galactic society. But we also remembered our own history, Hayes continued. We knew that not every species would choose cooperation over conquest. So while our diplomats were negotiating trade agreements, our military was preparing for the day when diplomacy would not be enough. Captain Dex of the Krell battle fleet, whose own forces had suffered significant losses during the brief war that followed the Valakian defeat, raised one gray hand. Captain Hayes, what you describe sounds like a decades-long deception. You pretended to be weak while building overwhelming military superiority. Hayes shook her head. Captain Dex, we were never weak. But we were also never dishonest about our capabilities. Every treaty we signed included detailed information about human military doctrine. Every trade agreement contained provisions for mutual defense. Every diplomatic mission included military attachés who were available to answer questions about our forces. Ambassador Thompson stepped forward and opened his briefcase, removing a thick document bound in blue leather. The problem was not that we hid our strength. The problem was that you interpreted our restraint as inability. He placed the document on the podium where the chamber scanners could project its contents for all delegates to see. The title read, Treaty for the Regulation of Interspecies Conflict and the Prevention of Total Warfare. This treaty, Thompson announced, represents a new understanding between humanity and the galactic community. It establishes clear rules for how conflicts will be resolved, what actions constitute acts of war, and what responses those actions will trigger. The syndicate delegate, whose species had been conquering others for millennia, studied the document with interest. What does this treaty require of us? Hayes answered before Thompson could speak. It requires you to make a choice. Honor our rules of engagement, and we will honor yours. Respect our colonies and civilian populations, and we will show the same courtesy to yours. Attack our defenseless, and face the consequences of unrestricted warfare. The chamber remained silent as delegates absorbed the implications of what she was saying. The treaty was not a surrender or a demand for tribute. It was an offer to return to the status quo that had existed before the Valakian attack, but with clear understanding of what would happen if that status quo was violated. General Voss's energy form pulsed with what his translator interpreted as curiosity. And if we refuse these terms? Thompson activated a new holographic display that showed the current positions of human fleets throughout the galaxy. There were far more red dots representing human military vessels than anyone had realized. Then you will discover that the Valakian conflict was not a demonstration of our full military capability, Thompson said calmly. It was a demonstration of our restraint while conducting total warfare. We still held back. The ancient Eldari delegate was the first to speak after several minutes of stunned silence. We accept. On behalf of the Eldari Consortium and all our affiliated species, we accept humanity's terms. One by one, every major power in the galaxy added their agreement to the treaty. The Cortani Collective, the Krell Hegemony, the Syndicate of Worlds, all of them chose cooperation over the alternative. As the signatures were added to the document, Hayes reflected on how completely the galaxy's understanding had changed. 6 months ago, they had seen humanity as weak prey to be divided among stronger predators. Now they understood that they had been in the presence of apex predators who had chosen to be civilized. The treaty signing took 4 hours to complete, with representatives from over 200 species adding their agreement to the new galactic order. When it was finished, the chamber felt different, not just politically, but atmospherically. The tension that had dominated galactic politics for decades had been replaced by something approaching mutual respect. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, the Eldari representative approached Hayes with steps that seemed to flow like liquid crystal. "Captain," he said in his ancient voice, "we have learned something important today. Rules are not chains that bind the strong, they are gifts that protect the weak from those strong enough to choose mercy." Hayes nodded, understanding in her eyes. The galaxy is safer now that everyone knows the difference. The treaty would be remembered as the beginning of the longest period of peace in galactic history.